Jimmy K here, Metal Boys. Look at this. The Metal Boy shirts are now on sale. Just go to the video description to find out on how you can purchase one. Metal! In these crazy times, you need a Metal Boys hat. You can pick it up at metalboys.com. Dave Ellefson.
Yes.
Oh my God. Documentary. And wait, new news. Podcaster. The David Ellefson Show. Great news. I'm happy you're jumping into the podcasting world. Welcome to the club.
Yeah. Well, look, a lot of people started this back during COVID, right? Because we were all at home. In fact, I was just practicing here songs for my Bass Warrior tour, which starts next week down in Italy. And it was just reminding me going through the Ellefson No Cover record, because that was the same thing. You know, I called all my friends up. I said, look, I know we're home. We don't know how long. We don't even know what all this COVID crap is. But let's keep playing. Let's keep making some music. And, you know, it's funny because everybody, I know as a consultant to Jackson Guitars and with my own signature basses, you know, the music, that side of the music industry was up 300%. I mean, people were buying guitars and podcast equipment, and suddenly, you know, we're at home and we're getting creative, right? It's what we do. So suddenly podcast studios and this stuff just was, well, you know, blowing through the roof. And of course, I try to talk to everybody, you know, even the little guy that's just trying to get in, because I realize if they talk to me, my name hits the news wire and suddenly they're in the game as a podcaster. And look, I do that for other people because other people did that for me, you know, and I know how hard it is. Sometimes you just need a cheerleader. You just need a champion to get you in the door. And if you can say, hey, I interviewed so-and-so and so-and-so, suddenly it's easier to get more people. So as long as they're not talking shit and they're being cool and, you know, they're kind of reporting the rock and roll news, I'm down with helping anybody, you know. So to me, that's kind of the benchmark. So, but yeah, the David Ellefson Show, you know, Joshua Toomey, I had just done Talk to Me podcast right before NAMM in January. And he asked me at the end of it, he goes, hey, you know, do you ever think about doing a podcast? I said, well, I did a few of them back in the, during COVID. We, you know, when I had my music foundation, we did some stuff. We partnered with the Grammys when they had their music education program, which is since when had gone away. So we did some stuff back then. And, you know, it was cool. I mean, that one we did, I mean, that was like the Jerry Lewis telethon, you know, I mean, it was like 8 hours long. We're talking to everybody. So, you know, talking isn't the problem, you know, it's more about just making sure we're talking about fun, cool stuff, which I guess that isn't a problem either, because it's a fun, cool life, you know, so glad to be in the herd here, you know.
Well, I'm happy for you. I know you've always been on this show. You've always given your time for this show. And, you know, I just could only wish you the best of luck.
Thank you.
More good news. Screaming Butterfly Entertainment, in partnership with Ellefson Films and Bayview Entertainment, have announced the new date for the red carpet premiere event of the fully authorized Nick Menza documentary, This Was My Life, Nick Menza's Metal Memories, with Megadeth and Beyond. It's going to be taking place Thursday, April the 10th at Laemmle. Is it that Laemmle Royale Theater? Is that how you pronounce it? How do you pronounce it?
That sounds right. Yeah.
Members of the cast and crew will be there in attendance for Q&A sessions after the screening of the film. So for those of you who know Nick Menza, of course, he was a member of Megadeth and he's done other projects as well. Passed away. How long has it been now, Dave?
2016.
26. Wow, man, time flies.
I think it was May. Was it May 2016? I remember very clearly, we were just starting the Megadeth ramp up for the Dystopia tour. We were in Albany, New York, playing at the Rock and Derby, which was a bizarre gig. There was like a Derby smash up thing going on. And then meanwhile, over here was like Megadeth, Collective Soul, Ghost. I mean, this very bizarre mix.
Only in America.
Yeah, exactly. No, for sure. Yeah, a bizarre mix of people, but a very fun festival. And, you know, I remember Dave called me in the middle of the night. It's probably 2 a.m. local time in the East Coast, and was just beside himself, freaking out. He goes, "Dude, Nick's dead. Nick's dead." I was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! What's going on?" And so, he just kind of gave me the skinny, that he died. And Nancy Sales, who is a publicist in LA and had been friends with Nick and worked with Nick a bit, she called me and gave me the more 411 of it, that had happened on stage, Baked Potato, while playing with Chris Poland's band Ohm and all the rest of it. So, and then after, so I guess fast forward through that year, NAMM show 2017, I believe it was. After that, I drove up to downtown rehearsal where Chris Poland works, and Chris, we were just hanging out bullshitting, and he filled me in on kind of the everything in the room as it happened, and he said, "Look, it happened." He said Nick was in incredibly good spirits. His health was great. It seemed like, he said, he goes, "I didn't know he had any heart issues." And, all I know is Nick used to love his orange roughy fish from Gelson's that he'd buy. And I knew he also used to love steak, and he's a true Italian. So I don't know other than that, his health condition, but, Chris was telling me he played great. His tempos were pushing it, as he would often do. I think it was going into song 3. Chris was introducing song 3, and all of a sudden he heard kind of the clunk, 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 and he looked back at Nick, and he was laying against the drum monitor next to the hi-hat, and he said, "Nick, come on." He said he thought he was putting him on, like he was joking, like Nick would, and like Nick would do something like that. He said, "Nick," and he looked, and he noticed, his eyes were open. He was just kind of laying there. I was like, "Oh shit!" Like, help, get some help on the stage. And then it was panic moment. He was gone. His soul left. It was it. They tried to revive him. And as Danya, Nick's sister, and I have talked, he wasn't meant to come back. He was, it's almost like his soul left as soon as, probably before his body hit the ground. You know what I mean? And he was meant to go, and it was meant to be done. His time on earth was over. And, I always say, and people, I don't want anybody to think it's gruesome or gross anyway, but, he kind of got to go the way he would have wanted to go, behind the drum kit on stage, being a freaking rock star, and that's just who Nick was.
I think a lot of people would think that too. Why go out, in your bed at night, go out on stage as what you love to do, right? I think it's.
I mean, maybe getting old is overrated. I don't know. Maybe, going out, the way you want, like that, maybe that is the way to go. It's, I guess when the good Lord calls you home, it's time to go home, and, Nick, and as, Nick's son, Nicholas, has talked about, in fact, he called me right after that, and we were talking, I think that sometime within a few days after that, he said Nick was very at peace. He had flown up to see the boys who lived with their mother up in Seattle, I think, and right before he passed, and he said, "Man, my dad was really at peace. He was like literally out. We were out in the forest, and he's literally like hugging a tree, like, oh, can you feel the vibrations of the earth? Like literally tree hugging, And Nick was a real earthy, groovy kind of guy like that, whether it was his weed, the fish, nature, hiking, mountain biking, whatever. He was kind of an earthy soul, he liked to be at one with everything. He liked to be at peace with things, as sort of rowdy and funny and, all that he could be. He was, he meant no harm to anyone or anything on the planet, so It was great to hear. So it sounded like, when my dad passed, back in 1994, he called me. We had a really good conversation before, before I took a little vacation to Hawaii while we were recording the euthanasia record, just getting ready to start the euthanasia record. We had this long, like super long talk. And then as I went home to his funeral, a week later or whatever, a lot of his friends said the same thing. He said, it's so weird. Your dad called. We just had this great talk for, And they all said it, like all these people, you know, are like, yeah, it's weird. He called me too, you know. So it's kind of, you know, it's almost like the soul knows it's time to go, you know, and it's kind of going around the horn saying goodbye, you know. So I was happy to hear that about Nick, and so as much as we're sad he's not here, his passing shouldn't really be looked on as a sad thing. You know?
So this documentary is coming out. A lot of people know his character. A lot of people don't know his character. What do you want the audience to get out of it at the end of the day?
You know, look, his big famous years are the 10 years he was in Megadeth, right? No doubt about it. And I think that's why, as Bayview updated the sort of tagline of the film, you know, his life with Megadeth and beyond. I think for me going into it, I viewed it as this is Nick's life. Yeah, Megadeth was a part of it, but that was not all of who Nick was. Even when I got to know Nick, you know, he came in sort of as an understudy for Chuck Beeler. He was on the crew, driving the truck, you know, setting up the drums, doing all that, sort of biding his time, waiting for, you know, his moment when he might be behind the kit. We didn't even know if that was going to happen or not. And then one day it did. And then getting to know Nick, you know, in 1989 into, say, 1990, because, you know, he joined, I guess, kind of the spring of 1989. We went in, we did the No More Mr. Nice Guy single for SBK Records for that, for the movie Shocker and the Wes Craven movie. And we recorded the track with Desmond Child at the record plant. And then we shot the video for Penelope Spheris that she did. And that was a very rough transition, you know, because at that time, me and Dave were getting cleaned up from our old habits and old ways. Nick was new in the band. We were just a three-piece, you know. We were continuing to write Rust in Peace. We did the demos in December that year with Chris Poland filling in, playing some second guitar just to sort of give the imaging of kind of a two-guitar dynamic that Megadeth always was. But never with the idea that Chris would be in the band. I mean, it may have been floated out there, but it was clear that wasn't meant to be, and we were fine with that, and so was Chris. It was just kind of good that we were actually on friendly terms with Chris, you know, after his departure. And of course, he was clean, he was sober, so for him to come back in the room with us with the understanding we're all clear-headed and sober and there's no drugs around, he was okay with it, you know. So, you know, around the corner into the new year, we auditioned Marty. Suddenly the lineup's complete and we're ready to go take on the world and rule the next decade like we did. So, you know, but during that time, you know, Nick and I, you know, he was a good friend to me. You know, he helped me get clean. He and our manager, Ron Lafitte, you know, they kind of had a two-headed attack, you know, of how do we get the Daves clean? You know, it was literally like Steven Tyler and Joe Perry. You know what I mean? It's like, if we can get these guys clean, there's a bright future for the band.
David, I was going through Mustaine's book, and Jesus, I don't know how you guys survived. Go ahead.
I always say, you know, if a lot of dope and booze doesn't ruin your friendship, a little bit of sobriety sure will. You know?
That's a good point.
And, a good point. You know, because it's now all of a sudden, I remember being in the hallways of, you know, Rumbo Recorders as we were recording Rust in Peace. And Dave and I just kind of trying to figure out, like, how to be friends. You know, it was awkward because, you know, we met over a case of Heineken, you know, in 1983, and that set the tone, and off we went and formed the band. And now here we are trying to, like, okay, who are you? You know,
when you were recording that album, were you guys sober at that point, or was it
we
after?
Were. Yes, we were clean. We were clean. Dave went to rehab one last time as me and Nick were actually putting the drums and bass tracks down with Mike Klink. He talks about this in the Rust in Peace book now, of course, probably talks about it in his own book as well, you know, but yeah, so as you know, me and Nick were working hard in there, laying down bass and drum tracks. Marty's in the, you know, out in the lounge, practicing the parts, practicing solos, kind of getting prepared, you know, for his participation. Dave comes back into the studio maybe a month later or so, and then he starts cutting his guitars and vocals. I seem to remember Holy Wars was the first track he played and the first track he sang, if I'm correct.
Okay.
And then, you know, then we just, you know, once he was back in the studio, we, you know, finished the record up, you know, and I think Marty's first solo was Tornado with Souls. So some of the greatness of that record was the impulse and the sort of explosive energy that, like, here we wrote this record in this, you know, deep into our addiction, and now here we are stone cold sober. And anyone who's gone through that transition knows when you get clean, it's almost like, let the Hulk out of the fucking green suit. You know what I mean?
But also, this, as Nick Menza said in some interview or another, there was no click tracks.
You know,
there was no click on that. Was it, or was
there was. I you know, and I think I remember, you know, before Dave went away to treatment for the last time, we laid down the click tracks, and that is what me and Nick cut the record to, those click tracks. But I mean, you know, it's very different. There was no Pro Tools. Things couldn't be nudged. You know, once you printed that tempo to tape, that is the tempo. It's like you can't sit back and go, let's nudge it up a little bit with the computer, you know, bump, you know, you can do so much stuff now. So once that, you know, that was it. We cut those. Me and Dave and Nick played through all the tracks, printed the click tracks, and that feels good, you know, because it was like, it's a little too fast, a little too slow. This part here needs to bump up. This part here needs to come down. And, you know, that's, I guess, probably when we learned even more of the art of, you know, say, you know, I mean, Holy Wars had a lot of different tempos. Five Magics, we used to joke that was the master of five tempos, because, you know, we cut, you know, all that stuff. But so we did cut it to click. I think everything had a click on that record. Best I recall. That it did. So yeah, it was
long time ago. It
was laborious. I mean, it was an incredible amount of work. You know what I mean?
It was 1 year. Was it not 1 year of rehearsing those songs over and over again?
Yeah, pretty much a year of writing, rehearsing. I mean, really, it started. I think we started while we were on the So Far So Good So What record, because I believe on War Chest, there's the versions of Chuck Beeler, who recorded Holy Wars in its entirety, as is. That version, you know, that same arrangement got printed onto, you know, rest in peace, obviously, with Nick on drums, new tempo, the whole thing. But Chuck also recorded what became Tornado of Souls, and also recorded Polaris. Okay. And, you know, once Dave came back into the session, that he came in with he had broke up with his girlfriend Diana, and he'd written the lyrics Tornado of Souls. So thank God he went to rehab. We got a song out of it. You know what I mean? So you know, so I thought that was great. You know, he comes in and because the music was done, we didn't really have a lyric for it. So finally, bang, he had a lyric. And while he was in there, me and Nick put down 2 tracks, because Mike Klink kept looking at me and Nick and go, "You guys have any more songs? Like, there's only records like 28 minutes long," or whatever it was, you know. And really, you know, if you look at all the Megadeth records through the 80s, Killing, Peace, So Far So Good, they were all literally about 30 minutes. Yeah. They were 8 tracks, 8 compositions, 30 minutes, and that's all that was required. That was all that was ever asked of us. But going into 1990, I think part of it was because the record companies were paying up to 11 songs of mechanicals, meaning they were paying the music publishing. So they wanted 11 compositions on the record. And I know for sure that started on Countdown to Extinction. So pretty much through the 90s, all the Megadeth records had 11 tracks, because that's what was called for on the publishing agreements. And that's how much Capitol Records would pay us for 11 songs.
Oh yeah, it makes sense with all bands. At what point did Dave, you know, as you guys are getting sober, at what point did Dave say, you know what, here's the sobriety contract, Nick? At what point did?
Well, you know, look.
and he went off. I mean, again, I'm reading all sides here. I'm reading all sides.
I remember coming home from the drug dealer, and Ron Lafitte was at me and Dave's apartment, and I was done. And I remember breaking down, crying, and I just said, "Ron, I need help." And he looked at me and he said, "David, I will help you. I will drop everything to help you, but you got to want it." I said, "I want it. I'm done. I want it." And I did. Now, it took a few months to turn the corner, but that's when he hired our band counselor, John Bocanegra. And we would do these band meetings at least once or twice a week. I would see John a couple of times a week myself, and he kind of became my sponsor through the 12-step programs and took me through that process. And then I got sober. By March 1st, I was sober, and I've stayed sober ever since. So, for me, like Ron said, I'm here to help, but you got to want it. Now, he was mentoring under Aerosmith's manager at the time, Tim Thomas, who had gotten Aerosmith sober, right? And so it's kind of a similar dynamic. It's like Tyler, like Dave, had to be clean. If the top guy ain't clean, it's just, we're wasting our time. But once Tyler got clean, now everyone else needed to be clean. So, we went through this process where first Dave had to be clean, and I'm clean, you all got to be clean, and he even had Ron's boss bring me in the office one day and say, if you use, you lose, you get clean or you're out of the band. I was like, fuck you. I was pissed off. I was like, I'll get sober at you motherfuckers. I was pissed, So it's funny, as much as resentment it takes a lot of alcoholics out to get loaded again. It's funny. I kind of got sober under resentment. You know what I mean? It was like, I was like, I'll get sober at you. I'll show you. And
at the end, did everybody sign it?
No, there was no written agreement. It was just understood. It's like, hey, get clean or it's over. I mean, the band can't work. And if you want to be part of it, we got to be clean. Now look, Marty wasn't an addict. Nick, enjoyed his beer and a couple of bong hits or whatever, but he wasn't an addict, so to speak. So, it's kind of these two new guys coming in with me and Dave, cleaning it up. And really, Marty, I've read Marty's book. I haven't finished it all, but I've read a lot kind of up through this part we're talking about. And he's very clear and he's very coherent. He remembers the details, the facts. He's, so Dreaming Japanese is also another good resource of this, because Marty's book was very clear about really telling the story about what happened, how it went down, a lot of the emotions in the room, because there was sobriety, then there wasn't sobriety, and sort of the fear and all the setbacks that came from that. So it's, you're in a line of work that celebrates the party and good times and ego and everything that goes contrary to a sober lifestyle. So the fact that any of us stay clean more than a day or two, let alone decades or more, is unbelievable. I mean, we're very grateful, to have had that success. So really the 90s was kind of the sober decade. And, the funny thing is, look at how great the output of the music was. Look at how great the songs were. We kept one lineup together for 10 years, and unfortunately, I asked the pointed question in the movie, and I won't tell the answer because it's kind of a hook in the movie. I asked Nick's friends, I said, okay, there was a lot of this kind of negative angle toward Dave about Nick getting fired, and I think that that's very wrong. And I said, hey, I don't think that that's fair. I mean, Nick and Dave had their friendship. They had their ups and downs. And I would always kind of, when Dave would be upset, I'd be like, hey, let's not break this up. And they said, remember Kiss, Gene, Paul, Ace, and Peter, man. Once one of them left, the house crumbled. And the same thing happened to us, really, to a large degree. Once Nick was out, that started sort of the, Rome crumbled, and because then it was another album, Marty's gone, and, then it was, just all that it was. And really it wasn't, in my opinion, in a lot of ways, wasn't really till, the Drover Broderick lineup was strong. I think we did as great of a job as could be, as you ever could, with the 20th anniversary of Rust in Peace. But then on Dystopia, when it was Chris Adler and Kiko, I felt like that was when the band really felt like four rock stars again. The same feeling I had with that lineup is the feeling I had with Rust in Peace. I felt like this is four fucking rock stars,
David, let me ask you this. I read Dave Mustaine's story. I've read up on Nick Menza's story on this whole firing business. I think I've read your book too, and I've read Marty Freeman, and should Dave Mustaine be worried about this movie? Because there's no. Nick Menza was saying, I want money. I want my money. If I want to go with this reunion, but Dave's saying, listen, we paid you. We've taken care of you. And there was no sort of consensus, but will Mustaine say, you know what, that's not true, or that's not my side of the story? Is it a fair?
Look,
Is it a fair sort of assessment?
I think it's very fair, and I went to great lengths to make sure that Dave is viewed very fairly. He's held in high esteem. In fact, what Nick said about him, even in his book, Nick, I read his book. I was the first guy interviewed for his book, and I was nervous about it because I was in Megadeth at the time, and I didn't want this to be any kind of shit talking. And I think it's very fair. There's absolutely nothing slanderous toward Dave at all in it. I made sure of that because, Dave was my partner during that time. And I think it's fair that, Dave and I always had a saying, you praise in public, you criticize in private, and with the internet and all this bullshit now, people seem to have suddenly forgot that they just go on the internet and talk shit about everybody. And that's not cool. It really isn't, And I think even Dave's, even Nick's, comments about his relationship with Dave. I noticed in his book he would be upset about something, and then he'd say, "But I realized I needed to make amends, or I realized, I was wrong about this, or I realized, it was Dave's band." Like Nick would tell me that he'd get in the car. We'd be going to the airport or something, or we'd be traveling, and he'd say, I was talking to my dad, because Nick's dad's badass. Don Menza, he's fucking badass, in his genre. And he'd always say, he goes, "God damn it, it's Dave's band. Do it his way, da-da-da." Because, Don worked under some pretty tough guys, Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson. He did a ton of studio work, with the greats. And he played on records with Toto, he played on Madonna records. Don's badass. So Don knew when you're hired, suit up, show up, shut up, play your part, and get your check and go home and don't cause trouble, So I think probably Don was as hard on Nick as anybody, And look, being in a rock group, it was hard because one of the things that was successful about that Rust in Peace lineup is we really did try to make it a team and a group, and that means that we're trying to work together, yet everybody has a different role, And, as Ron Lafitte and I talked one day, about songwriting, because that, songwriting and publishing and how the money is split. That's a sure way to either make a band stay together or split up. Geddy Lee talks very openly about it. He goes, "Hey, at one point we just decided, let's just split it 3 ways." That just takes that argument off the table.
And so did Black Sabbath in the original days, right? And so did Van Halen. And look, everybody's going to put their... Anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so and that was always an issue in Megadeth, always. Dave from the very beginning, and it probably stems back to his, his days with Metallica, and his songs, and I read it in his book. He said, it's like those songs for him, that means everything to him. And boy, he protects that. And so, look, at some point, it's an argument you're going to lose. And, we'd have many conversations about it. Euthanasia, we went into it. It was actually Nick's idea. He goes, let's just pre-decide up front how much everybody's going to get. That way, when we're showing up every day, whoever brings the best idea that day will get used, and it won't have any agenda of, well, he's going to make more money than me, or how come he's got more songs in the record than me. Just bring your best. And if it turns out they're all Dave and Marty songs, then whatever, at least me and Nick will get paid too, and it turned out to be, I think, a pretty fair split of stuff, so that was Nick's idea. Now it only worked on one album, and Dave didn't want to do it anymore after that. But it was a great album, and is one of the more esteemed, especially internationally, one of the greatest Megadeth records that we made. And because it feels like a group, it feels like a team.
Billy Corgan, I think when he first started off with Smashing Pumpkins, not metal, but his lawyers and I guess his advisor said, "Listen, if you take all the credit, the band will dissolve."
Right.
And that's basically.
Well, look, in the beginning, I remember Mike Klink told me, he told the Guns N' Roses guys that when they did Appetite for Destruction, he just said, "Look, this is a long road ahead. If you guys have any success at all, and that's still to be determined, you guys got a lot of years in the trenches, man. You got to split everything equally, or else you'll never survive." And that was coming from the producer, right?
Yeah.
And so, I think good, good directions is, listen, the more fair you can be on all of it, the better, at least in the beginning, and then look, and then as often happens, one or two people try to grab the rest of it and take it for themselves, and then bands fall apart. So yeah, it's not often you see a group, Rush is one of the very few where, they somehow had a friendship in there, and they made it work financially, they made it work creatively, and it's not often that happens. And I mean, we went through every version of that in and out of sobriety. And I thought Nick's book was really good. His author, J. Marshall Craig, he even said, he goes, look, I was writing the book and then Nick died, so it's like I had to go, all right, do I end the book, do I make up some shit, like what do I do? And he goes, I chose to keep Nick's voice through the book, basing it on interviews and information I had, but I tried to just continue Nick's voice, and I thought he did a very good job. So that's so look, with the film, I'd like to think everybody is shown in a colorful light, and I know it would probably make more salacious, juicy headlines if it was a bunch of shit talking and da 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 da. You know me, that's not my nature, right? So if my name's going to be on the film as it is, that's not how I'm going to do it, and Nick was very grateful to Dave. He was very grateful that he was part of the group. He despite any of all of our challenges.
Did you ever feel the guilt, when Nick came back for the reunion? He wasn't up to what he should be in terms of performance. Did you ever feel that guilt that you guys kind of didn't bring him back, or you thought that was the right decision, even looking back at it today?
No, he was not at all in the mindset to be in the group. It is more than just the performance. It's the thinking. It's the mindset. I mean, why do you think I've never quit, right? Because once you quit and suddenly you cut your hair and go sell real estate or take up golf or, whatever it is you would do if you decide, okay, I'm done being a rock star.
Yeah.
To come back into it is so much harder. And Jimmy DeGrasso made a very interesting comment one day. We were just bullshitting about this. He said, for the drummers, it's harder. Bill Ward, Peter Criss, Nick Menza, these guys who are such legends, the gig hit them first. They got the hardest brunt of it because of the physical demand, Yeah. And I thought those were three good examples. And again, Peter came back into the band, and I thought the first Kiss, reunion was good. But, Nick was a very different person when that audition happened, and he was very nervous. I feel like there was stuff between him and Dave that just wasn't quite settled. And in a lot of ways, I feel like Nick died from a broken heart. Wow. I really do. I feel like his heart was broken from how things ended with him and Megadeth. And he went through some challenging years after that, and we've talked, it was talked about because I made sure it was talked about in the film. It was uncomfortable. I wasn't there to make the family feel awkward. In a lot of ways, I feel like this film is for the family. It's for Danya, his sister. It's for Don and Rose, his mom and dad, which is why I wanted to come out before it's their turn, what I mean, to pass on, So to me, a lot of this is kind of doing this for Don and Rose and Danya and for Nick's boys, which is why it's more than just the story of Megadeth. It's the story of Nick as a kid and that kid-like, childlike fun and spirit that he brought into Megadeth, which after 10 years in that band is going to, look, it's either going to light your flame or it's going to dim your flame. It just is. It was a big rock group that had a lot of everything. It had temptation. It had money. It had success. It had everything that could either make you awesome or kill you. You know what I mean? That's what that does to you,
Or a broken heart, right?
Or a broken heart. And when he left and he literally physically was not able to do the gig anymore, I remember we played in Mesa, Arizona. We were starting up a run of dates, and then we're going to go right on to Ozfest 98. We were playing at the Mesa Amphitheater, which was hometown for me and Dave at that time. And he played. We were playing In My Darkest Hour, and we knew things were really starting to go south. And again, I think Marty talks very good about this in his book, Dreaming Japanese. But suddenly Nick, he wasn't present, he wasn't aware, and we were playing In My Darkest Hour, and I went back to him to kind of cue some, we kind of had some God, these accents, right? And he just played right through it. He looked at me like he wasn't aware of what was going on, and I just went, oh my God, this poor guy is just, he can't do this anymore. And that night on the bus, Nick and I had a conversation, and he was asking me about my sobriety, which is interesting because I think the roads he went down after that were not so well for him, and it's weird that he was sort of asking, and I know as an addict myself, you sort of ask, but if you say too much, you're sort of admitting that maybe you need help, you know what I mean? And at that point in my mind, I was done, I was like, okay. And then Dave and I talked the next morning over coffee or something. They said, dude, you have my blessing now. You have my blessing to make the change. Nick can no longer do the kick. We're getting ready to head into Ozfest. And this was the new Ozfest. This is fucking Limp Bizkit, Tool. I mean, this is the new 90s generation. These people think different. They play different. Their body movements on stage are different. We have got to be as good as we fucking can to hold our own with these guys, And
it's tough cutting someone loose, especially when you have such a great history with them,
But and a friendship with them, So it was not easy, and we had to do it. Once Jimmy DeGrasso came in and knocked it out of the park, once that tie was severed, now there it goes. So,
but we should also talk about the fun side of Nick too. He believed in conspiracies and aliens, and I've heard him talk about this stuff. And not to a completely serious level, but he enjoyed that kind of talk, right? Maybe Hangar 18.
And I think he enjoyed that it would wind us up, and it would sort of, he'd walk in the room and he'd talk, Jesus was an alien, or it was a hologram. It was all bullshit, you know what I mean? He was just like, oh God, Nick, really, you know what I mean? And he would just do it to just kind of get a rise out of people. He liked to be in the center of attention, and which maybe for him and Dave that became kind of a rub because Dave was the star of the show, for lack of a better term, you know what I mean? And he didn't like sharing the spotlight with Dave. He wanted to be hot. He's like, how do I find my place? Whereas I think Nickel McBrain had a funny way of sort of being the host of the party without spilling over into Steve and Bruce's spotlight. Sometimes Nick would go a little too far, and he'd get over there and he'd kind of wind everybody up, and that was.
Look at this here, Dave. Rhodes Into the Future. That was Nick Menza's first recording with Kelly Rhodes, of course, the brother of Randy Rhodes. A lot of people don't know this. When I interviewed Kelly years back, he told me about Nick being in the band, and it's his first real official recording. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's talked about in the movie. So those are the things that are,
I don't want to give it all away. But
that is, again, that's to our beginning point. This isn't just the Megadeth story. Obviously there's a lot there of that, but there was all these other things kind of, warming up into the big gig and life afterwards,
Was it true that he actually tracked drums for Cinderella at one point?
I don't know. I know he did an audition for Slayer. I don't know what else, and that could have been, I don't know if that was before or after Megadeth. I can't remember. That might have been before.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Cinderella.
All right. Well, listen, I think everybody got a good feel of what this documentary will be like. The life of Nick Menza, a celebrated life of Nick Menza. Unless there's something else you want to add.
No, I'm glad we finally got it announced. A new date for April. So if you're in the area, definitely come out. The theater is small. It only holds a couple hundred people. So it's kind of a cool, intimate environment. Nick's family will be there, and we're going to do a little red carpet. So we got some rockers and people there to do that, and take some pictures and, kind of spice it up. And then we'll do that. And then afterwards, me and Holly, the director, and I think Danya, Nick's sister, will be there to do a little Q&A about the movie and about Nick afterwards as well. So yeah, should be a fun night out.
April 10th at the Laemmle Royal Theater in Los Angeles. That'll be the first premiere and screening of the film. Yep. Also, the David Ellefson podcast. Yes. Make sure to check it out. It's coming out. This will probably come out. I'll release it very quickly, this show. But just at the beginning of March, right? That's when the podcast begins.
March 3rd will be our first episode. And we've got a few of them done and in the can. So as I'm out here doing the Bass Warrior Tour, rocking through Europe this month, or the month of March, I should say, we've got some entertaining episodes and some cool guests. And it's fun. It's turned out to be a fun thing.
I'm happy for you. Anyways, thank you for being on today.
Rock.
Thanks for sharing. And we will talk soon.
Thanks, Jimmy. See you, buddy. Bye.